Hi everyone, my name's Jo Barclay Logie. Today we're going to explore a different or another bead weaving technique, stitch, which is called brick stitch. And so it's another one of those mini tutorials or those mini bead weaving tutorials where you learn a particular technique. And in particular this time we're going to be looking at circular brick stitch. Now, I've made a few items. In fact, I've made a whole set and I've called it my summer collection set. I've done earrings, a ring and a pendant. And I'm going to show you how to make the earrings, but while we make the earrings, you will get an inkling of how to make the rest. So this is the pendant, and there you can see the ring on my finger. And here, I don't like getting too close to the camera, but there are the earrings that we're going to learn how to make using the circular brick stitch. Before we actually get started, I just wanted to thank you all for the feedback you've been giving me, because this is still a fairly new YouTube channel. One of the bits of feedback I got was, please can I put a materials list on the screen there for you? Great point, and I do it in all my PDF tutorials that I sell in Etsy. Sadly, I'm not technically able enough to do that for you, but what I can do is I will pop a link, or I'll pop a list of all the ingredients, the materials that I use, down below in the description of this YouTube demo, so that you've got something to access quite easily. I know I always talk about them and tell you what I'm using, but perhaps it will be a lot easier if you've got a materials list that you can just refer to. So we'll get going now. Right, so let's have a good look at what we'll be using. Now for circular brick stitch, I find it a lot easier beading off a ring, one of these rings that I've got here. The size of the ring that you use doesn't matter at all. It will obviously alter the end design or the look of your design, but it really doesn't matter. So in this, I'm not going to be telling you exactly how many beads to use, because one, it's going to depend on the size of the ring you use, and two, it's going to depend how good you are with your tension, or how tight or loose you are with your tension as you bead around. So as I mentioned, we're going to learn how to make the earrings, and you will then know basically how to do the pendant and the ring, which I'm still wearing. Actually, it's become one of my most fun items or accessories to just pop on, and I can see myself making loads in different colours. Now, the ring is made all in one, so perhaps you've got your brick stitch and you've got 2-drop peyote stitch. Perhaps it needs a tutorial all on its own, because it's made on one piece of thread all in one go. So if you think that would be a good YouTube tutorial, just pop a comment below and I'll see what I can do for you. So as I said, it doesn't matter what size ring you use. The ones I've used are these ones. I'm going to move those ones out the way for now. Where the inside diameter is about 1 centimetre, and they're quite chunky, they're quite thick on the rim. And if I measured from the outside of the rim to the outside on the other side, it's about 1.5 centimetres. But as I said, you can use any size that you've got hidden in your stash. Then I'm using 3 different colours of size 8 seed beads for this particular design. And I've got a Picasso turquoise, I have got a Persimmon, and I have got a silver, galvanized silver. I'm also going to be using a few crystal bicones, which you can see at the base of my earring here, and on the pendant. If I just bring that back in, I went the whole way round with the crystals. And for the earring, I've got an ear wire, and I have got one closed jump ring, which I used over here. And I say use a closed jump ring because you don't want your thread to slip out of an open jump ring. If you've only got open jump rings, seal the opening with a bit of glue or clear nail varnish, or if you've got a soldering iron, you can pop a bit of solder on there. So those are all our materials, plus you need your beading needle, and I'm using a size 10, and I'm using 6-pound Wildfire today in the green colour. It just seems to be such a fantastic colour. It goes with everything, matches in with my beads perfectly, and I won't see too much of the thread. You're going to thread on approximately 1 wingspan of your thread onto your size 10 beading needle. Now, my wingspan, I understand, might be a bit longer than yours, so I'm going to say 1 3/4 meters of thread is going to be absolutely plenty for you to do this design. And to begin with, I'm going to the tail end of my thread, and I'm just going to thread it through my chosen ring, and I'm going to tie it off securely using a surgeon's knot, but I want to leave a 5 to 6 inch tail, which I'm then going to be able to weave in when I have finished. So I'm just doing a normal knot followed by a surgeon's knot, which is where you pass the thread through the loop once and through the loop a second time and pull tight. Now, don't worry about the thread. I know if you come in really close, you'll be able to see that little bit of green, but in the actual finished design, you don't notice it at all. So you've got your needle threaded and you've got the tail end knotted. And remember, you're leaving about a 6 inch tail because we're going to weave this tail into the design when we're finished, just to make sure that things are really secure. So the first thing you're going to do is, well, I'm going to start with the turquoise, the Picasso turquoise color, and I'm going to pick up 2, remember they're size 8 seed beads, and I'm just going to pop that down on the mat, and I'm going to let these come all the way down to the ring. Now you will find a way of holding your work, and I have found by keeping my forefinger just behind the beads, I keep them exactly where I want them to be, which is just on the outside of that ring. I'm going to pass the needle behind the back of the ring and up through the center. And to secure those beads in place, I'm going to come back up through that second bead. You can see the thread is exiting on the side here, and I'm going back up through that second bead. When you start your brick stitch, each round you're going to start with 2 beads, and then you can just take a bit of time with your fingers to manipulate them into place. From now onwards, because we've picked up our 2 and we've started, we're just going to be picking up 1 at a time. So 1 bead, come behind the ring and through the center, and by keeping my forefinger there, that bead is going to stay roughly in the place I need it to, and I'm going to pass the needle back up through that bead. And when I pull it into place, you'll see it sits snugly on its side alongside the previous 2. So let's do that again. Pick up 1 of your size 8s, come behind the ring and through the center, and then back up through that same bead. It just locks it in place alongside the others. And once more, pick up 1 of your size 8s. I'm using 8s because the rings I'm using are quite chunky, and I tried it with 11s and they were a bit teeny tiny and insignificant around the ring. But you can do this with 11s, and you can do it with 6s. You can play around with the sizes and the shapes of your beads. So I've come behind the ring, through the ring, and I'm coming back up through that last bead that I just added. So I'm going to continue with this the whole way around my ring, and I'll come back to you to show you how I end off on this side here. So I've come all the way around my ring, and you'll see my thread is exiting the very last bead that I added around this ring. Be very careful. You don't want to cram those beads in, because what happens is they pucker up and you distort the shape of that beautiful circle. So unless you've got a really big gap there, don't be tempted to add in an extra bead. What I'm going to do now is I don't think the gap is big enough, so I'm going to join the bead that I've just added to the very first bead that I picked up. So my thread's coming out of the bead I just added. I come down, pass the needle down through the first bead that I added, and I'm going to pass the needle back up through that last bead. So I haven't gone round the ring at all, I'm just going up and down through the beads. And when I pull that together, you see how that closes the gap a bit, and you can always shimmy these round a little if you feel that the gap is too large. But that way I've kept my perfect circular shape. I haven't got any beads that are crammed in and have pushed each other up and distorted the shape at all. So that's my first round of brick stitch complete, and you can see that's the top ring of my earring. We're now going to move on to the second colour which I used, and that's the silver. We're starting round 2, and whenever we start a round of brick stitch, we start by picking up 2 beads. Now if I flip this on its side, you might not be able to see too clearly actually, because the thread matches in with the beads so well, but joining this bead to that bead, there's a little bridge of thread. We call that a thread bridge. And then between the next 2 and the next 2 and so on. And we're going to be using those thread bridges now. So I've picked up 2 of my silver. My thread is exiting from that size 8, and I'm going to just slip my needle under the very first thread bridge that you can see there. And again, I'm keeping my forefinger in place because that's going to keep the silver beads now sitting where I need them to, which is on the outside of the turquoise. And just as we did in the previous round, I'm going to pass the needle back up through that second bead. So we're using the thread bridges as we used the ring in the first round. So come up through that second bead, and you've got your first 2 in place. Now you don't need to do this, but I'm just going to do it to make sure they're sitting correctly. Sometimes this first one can tilt up at a little angle, so just by passing your thread back through it and back up through that second one, you're just securing them in place and making sure that they're sitting correctly on top of your turquoise beads. Now it stands to reason that this silver circle that we're making is going to be bigger than the turquoise one, so you're going to be adding more beads in the silver. And remember, I said to you I wasn't going to tell you exactly how many beads I used in each round, because it depends on your tension and it depends on the size of the ring. There are no rules, you just want it to look neat. So now we're going to continue by just picking up 1, and I'm passing the needle just under that thread bridge between the next 2 beads, and I pass my needle back up through the silver bead I've just added. Now because we're adding more beads in this round, you might get to a stage where you need to use 1 thread bridge more than once. We'll see if we get there. So I'm picking up 1 and I'm coming under the next thread bridge between the 2 turquoise beads, and I pass my needle back up through the silver bead. The reason you may have to use 1 thread bridge more than once is because we are adding in extra beads. Now this is where I'm going to use the same thread bridge. There's the next one between the next 2 turquoise beads, but I've got space here to add in another one. And as I said, we're increasing the number of beads we're using, so if you get to a stage where you can reuse a thread bridge a second time, do so. So I'm using the same thread bridge that I used when I added the last silver bead, and I'm coming back up through the silver bead I've just added. And you can see how neatly the silver rim is now going to fit around the turquoise. So picking up a silver bead, and I'm now going to use the next thread bridge, pass up through the bead, picking up a silver, and I'm going to use that same thread bridge, pass up through the silver. So each time you're using a thread bridge, you're passing your needle just under the thread. I can't lift my needle up because the thread is stopping it. And I'm on the other side now, passing up through the silver bead. So you would continue adding your silver beads all the way around, and I'll come back to you when I'm ready to step up. I'm almost back to the beginning. Here this time round I've got a fairly large gap there, so I'm going to pick up one more of my silvers, use the next thread bridge, pass my needle back up through the size 8 that I've just added, and there's definitely no space to add in another one there. So just as we ended off the turquoise round, we're going to end off the silver round by passing down through the very first silver bead we added, and then back up through that last one that we added in this round. So there you've got 2 rounds complete. Now if I bring the ring back in, you can see that's where I stopped with the ring, and I've then got my ring shaft added on there. Now I'm sure that a lot of you will find it very easy to work out just how to make the ring, but remember what I said earlier, if you would like a tutorial on how to do this funky little ring, just pop a comment below, and if I get enough requests I'll certainly make a YouTube demo on how to do that. But we're going to continue with our earrings. So we're now moving on to the 3rd round, which is this lovely corally colour, the Persimmon, and we're starting a new round. So we're going to pick up 2 beads, and we're going to come under the first thread bridge between the 2 silver beads, get our beads sitting correctly, and pass the needle back up through the second one. And just as we did before, I'm going to make sure that these 2 are just sitting really neatly, so I'm passing back down through the first bead and back up through the second bead. And then you're going to continue just as you did the previous round. I can see that thread has got stuck there. Crisis averted, got the tail out of the way. And we just continue picking up 1, passing the needle under the thread bridge between the next 2 silver beads, and then back up through my coral colour. And you're going to continue the whole way around your circle. Almost back to the beginning, and time to join the 2 sides together. I'm not going to add in an extra bead, so you can see there's a fairly large gap there that I'm just going to ignore. I'm coming down through the first bead that I added in this 3rd round, and then I'm going to pass my needle up through the last bead that I added in this round. And as I pull it in, you can see how it pulls those together. So I've kept my circles going really concentrically. I'm not distorting the shape at all. Now this might be enough for you. You might want to stop here and say that's enough. That's fine, it's your design. But in my design, I've added another round of turquoise before I've added on some crystal sparkle. So I'm going to add the turquoise round, just the same as I've added all the other rounds, and I will come back to you when I'm ready to add in a bit of bling. So I've completed my turquoise round, and I'm ready to add in a bit of sparkle now. So to just show you the difference, on the earring I only chose to add the sparkle at the very base, and on the pendant I chose to add the sparkle in the whole way round. The technique is the same, you're still using the brick stitch techniques, but you would just stop short rather than continuing the whole way round. So I'm going to add the sparkle exactly where I have just finished doing this. Of course, you could add sparkle onto the outside of the ring as well. For me, this is a perfect size and I didn't want to go any bigger. So to add in the sparkle, let me bring my crystals in. You could use Swarovski, you could use Chinese, anything, but the bicone shape works quite well. We've always picked up 2 beads to start a round, but this time I'm going to pick up 3. I'm going to pick up 1 turquoise, 1 crystal, and 1 turquoise. And instead of going through the very first thread bridge like I normally would do between the bead where my thread is exiting and the second bead, I'm going to use the second thread bridge this time. I need a little bit of space because there are more beads there. And the crystal is going to stand or sit slightly proud. Same thing, I'm going to come back up through that last 8 that I added. So I've used the thread bridge and I'm coming up through the last 8. Now my thread is exiting an extra 8. I'm only going to pick up 2 from now onwards. I'm going to pick up a crystal and an 8, and I'm going to skip a thread bridge and come through the next one. And just as before, I'm going to pass my needle back up through that last 8. Again, I'm going to pick up a crystal and an 8, skip that first thread bridge and come through the second one, and pass the needle back up through the 8. Can you see how those crystals, there's a little gap there, and they're just sitting slightly proud of the rest of your circle. So I've got 3 more to add, and then I'll show you how to pop the 2 rings together. So I've added into my crystals into my second earring here, and my thread at the moment is exiting the last 8 that I came back up through. So the next thing you need to do is to bead just 1 round around a ring, which I've done here. So I've got this ready to go. There's my top ring for my earring, and this one is going to be joined via a jump ring at those 2 points there. So in the middle, I want to come up from the middle here, and I'm going to be attaching my jump ring onto this bigger ring first before I attach the smaller ring. But I need to get my thread from this size 8 all the way up to this end here. So I do that by passing through the beads, but to get going in that direction I've got to go backwards a bit before I go forwards. So I'm coming through the crystal and down through the 8, and then it's easy for me to go in the direction that I want to, and I'm just going to use these turquoise 8s on the outer rim. If you come through 2 beads, so if you come through the coral row as well, that's not a problem. So I'm just going to be beading down through an 8 and then up through an 8, down through an 8 and up through an 8, all the way till I'm at the middle point on the top here, ready to add my jump ring. So I've come round, and if I pop my needle up from the middle, you can see my thread at this end is exiting kind of in the halfway between my crystals at the bottom where I want to add that jump ring. And I'm going to add it between the 2 8s. So my thread's coming out and I pick up my jump ring and I'm going to come down through the 8 alongside it. Now you need to make this secure. Remember, if you're using an open jump ring, you want to seal it by using nail varnish or a bit of glue or some soldering iron. To reinforce it, I'm going to come back up through the same bead, back through my jump ring, and back down through the 8 on the other side. You can do that a few times. It's just reinforcing the stress points really of where the most wear and tear and most stress is going to be on your design. So I'm just coming through the jump ring and down the 8 on the other side. Now I'm ready to end off this working thread, and I'm going to do that by threading away. I'm going to make like a little maze. You know how you go up a bead, down a bead, change direction, but always passing through a bead to lose your thread. So I'm coming down, and I'm going to come down a few more, down through a coral, and I'll come up through the coral alongside it and the turquoise. So I'm just jumbling up, doing a little maze of thread within my beads before I can actually zap or snip this thread off. So I'm now going to go the other way and come back down again. It's totally random. There are no rules. There's no pattern to follow for this. You're just losing your thread in amongst your beads, and you can come all the way to the inner ring, to that first turquoise ring if you want, just by passing through your beads. You don't want thread to show, so if you skip a bead and your thread shows, you'll need to backtrack and go in reverse a little, because earrings flip round while you're wearing them. So you don't, even if you think, oh, the thread's only showing on the back, it's not true. If your earring swings round, you're going to see the thread on the front. So you just continue doing that, losing your thread in the beads until you're happy that you've made quite a complicated little maze and there's no way that that thread is going to come undone. If you're worried, you can tie a couple of half hitch knots, double half hitch knots as well, with a dab of glue. But really, if you've lost your thread in a clever way by reversing directions that you're going, as well as just going up and down, your thread should not undo at all. And you would then thread your needle onto the tail and weave that away in exactly the same way. So I'm going to get rid of my threads, and then I'm going to show you how to attach the smaller ring. In the same way as we attach the jump ring onto the larger ring, we're going to do exactly the same with the smaller ring. So exactly where my thread is exiting the smaller ring, I'm going to pass through the jump ring, and then I'm going to come down through the 8 on the other side. Pull it tight, and I'm going to reinforce this a few times, so it's going to be loose until you reinforce it. I'm just flipping it around so it's easier for me to hold and bead. So up through the 8, through the jump ring. I'm going exactly the same way as I did on the first thread through. Come down through the size 8. And I'm going to do that just once more. Not going round the ring at all, I'm just coming up and down through the beads and through the jump ring to secure it. So there we have our jump ring secured, and the last thing to add in now is the shepherd's hook, which is going to be at the top end. So just as I moved around the outer ring on the larger piece of this, I'm going to bead up and down through the 8s on the smaller ring, just as I'm doing here. until I'm at this top point here in order to add my shepherd's hook. I've got my thread to the top, and just as I added on the jump ring, I'm going to add on the shepherd's hook. So with my thread exiting an 8, I go through the shepherd's hook and I pass the needle back down through an 8 on the other side. And again, you're going to do that a few times to reinforce it before you can end off your threads in exactly the same way as I showed you before. So I'm going to do that for you now, and I'll come back to show you the completed set. So my summer holiday set is complete. I've got my gorgeous earrings, which are totally reversible. I've got my pendant, which has got a bit of sparkle all the way around. And I've got this little ring, which I just absolutely adore. You could even put a little candy bead or something like that in the center if you didn't want an empty hole there. So I hope that you've learned something today. If you haven't learned something, I hope you've picked up a good tip. And any comments or any questions, just pop them down below and I'll answer them as soon as possible. Other than that, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I know this has been a fairly lengthy tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you for the next one. Bye!